I do sense a change, that the demonizing propaganda that Israel relied on for so long, especially in the years right after 9/11, that you could reliably demonize Muslims. All you had to do is say, look, their name is Islamic Jihad. What more do you need to know about them? And people would immediately be on Israel's side. But that's not working anymore. And given that ultimately, as I point out, South Africa, apartheid South Africa, was never militarily defeated. It always retained immense military domination over the ANC or over the black population. It could have massacred them at will, and it did massacre them on many occasions. But it lost the legitimacy war. It lost the propaganda war. And once a regime loses any legitimacy, then all the weapons in the world will really not help you. And I really think that is the crisis Israel is in. As John is pointing out, tanks are of no use in a situation like this. You can have all the tanks in the world. It doesn't help you in a battle for international legitimacy. And in fact, it hurts you if you're seen as being this, military occupier and colonizer that's just blasting the indigenous people. It actually turns out to be worse. So it's hard to predict. Obviously, we don't have a crystal ball. But what we see, I think, in this past 10 days is really an intensification and confirmation of all of these trends we've been talking about that are not new, but have been happening for years. And I think now, possibly reaching a tipping point. I do think that as a result of this, like, BDS is going to become mainstream in a way that it hasn't before. And I think that, mainstream politicians are going to start, and public figures and celebrities and so on, are going to start endorsing boycott where they would not have dared to do so. I don't think it's the goal of Hamas to kill Israelis. That's the propaganda element of Israel and the Western media. It is the goal of Israel to kill Palestinians, and they do it very effectively. I think it's Israel's goal to kill as many Palestinians as they can get away with. In other words, to make it look as if they're not trying to kill Palestinians while killing them, in order to exact this high price on Palestinians. But look at what Palestinian resistance groups have done this time around. Last time in 2014, it was a big deal when Israel was forced to shut down Ben Gurion Airport, like for a few hours or for a day. It's been shut down for a week now. It's been shut down since the beginning. World airlines have canceled their flights, and it may be because of the pandemic that that's less shocking than it would have otherwise been, because we're so used to international travel being shut down now in a way we weren't in 2014. But nonetheless, this came at a time when Israel was celebrating its vaccination campaign and re-emerging and reopening international travel and business, and it's been shut down. And that costs an advanced economy like Israel a massive amount. I don't know what these are based on, but I've seen reports saying it's costing Israel $1 billion a day. That doesn't seem unreasonable to me when you think of an economy like Israel's. I think Israel's hubris, with this kind of triumphalist feeling that the Palestinian cause is dead, was that they could accelerate the ethnic cleansing of Jerusalem and Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan and the attacks on the Al-Aqsa Mosque with total impunity, because in the Israeli mind, Jerusalem, the Palestinians in Jerusalem were isolated. That was 200,000 people who could do nothing against the Israeli state. They were cut off from the West Bank, they're cut off from Gaza, they're cut off from anyone else. And so it was a major Israeli strategic miscalculation to think that the resistance in Gaza would not dare to respond from Gaza to Israel's actions in Jerusalem. And I cannot emphasize enough how that also changes the equation. Israel will now have to consider that whatever it does to Palestinians anywhere could result in, 6 million Israelis being in bomb shelters for a week, at least.
Yeah. Let's not forget, Naftali Bennett has bragged about killing Arabs in the past. What is having a man like this in power? What does this mean for Palestinians?
For Palestinians, it's like you change the executioner. That's it. It's no different to having a new executioner. Maybe for the spectators, it makes a difference, but for the person whose head is on the chopping block, It makes absolutely no difference at all who is carrying the axe. And that's what the change of government means for Palestinians. But we're already seeing efforts to whitewash this new set of executioners in Israel by the so-called international community, who are welcoming it and even talking about hopes that there will be a peace process and revival of talks about the two-state solution and this sort of thing. Well, actually, Naftali Bennett is even further to the right of Benjamin Netanyahu on this issue. And for the past decade, Naftali Bennett has been attacking Netanyahu from the right, claiming that Netanyahu is too willing to give the Palestinians too much. Bennett's policy is the annexation of almost all of the occupied West Bank without giving Palestinians living there any rights. So effectively, it's to formalize the situation of apartheid that already exists. That's who Naftali Bennett is. But we've already seen really delusional statements from, for example, Sven Koopmans, the European Union envoy, who's talking about looking forward to working with this government on peace. We've seen similarly delusional statements from Chuck Schumer, the majority leader in the U.S. Senate, saying that he hopes that this government will swiftly move towards talking about a two-state solution. These are complete fantasies, and they're very damaging to Palestinians if people repeat them, because, as I said, this is simply a new set of hands holding the axe, but the neck of the Palestinians is still lying on the chopping block.
Right. And what about the Arab parties in Israel? Now they're also part of the coalition for the first time in history. Will conditions in Israel improve for their supporters?
Well, only one Arab party, a very opportunistic party led by a man called Mansour Abbas, joined the government. And even one of his members, I think they have, 3 or 4 members, even one of his members abstained. But this is token representation of Arabs in the government. And indeed, it is being used to whitewash the true nature of this Israeli government. The vast majority of Palestinian citizens of Israel would not support this government, and indeed the majority of lawmakers from the Palestinian community in Israel did not vote for this government.
Ali, and just briefly, I don't have much time, but I want to ask you this. What about the other Arab nations? I mean, we've seen warming of relations with Israel among some of them. Is this likely to change?
Well, I think that's not affected by the change in government. That's affected by the strength of the Palestinian resistance that we saw in the last month or so, which proved to those Arab dictatorships that the Palestinian cause is alive and well, and the Palestinian people are still struggling for their liberation, because those unrepresentative dictatorships that made deals with Israel were betting on the idea that the Palestinian cause is dead and that the Palestinians can do nothing, so you might as well get into bed with Israel. That was a huge miscalculation on their part.
He's a co-founder of the Electronic Intifada and the author of The Battle for Justice in Palestine book. Thank you again.